Hey everyone, welcome back to our fourth video together. This video is a little bit different. Clearly this is not a piece of furniture as we know it. This is a 1940s tube radio by RCA through the Victor line. I have always wanted one of these things. I think they're super cool. I love the Art Deco appeal to it. And this was a marketplace find. I bought it for $60. It is solid. You can tell there are some scratches. There's a few chips in the veneer here and there, nothing major. The buttons are all there, which is a big plus. The gauge and the dials look really, really good. This is what it looks like from the back. I clearly have no clue what is going on here. I am not an electrician at all, but I do plan on getting that repaired at a local vintage repair shop here in the Houston area. What I thought was really cool about this piece is the person I bought it from, who knew really nothing about it, said, "Oh hey, I happen to have the original bill of sale for this." And I thought, okay, cool. So it's really neat. It tells you that the item sold in April of 1941 for $99.95 to a gentleman named Ed, who put down some money for it and then had it paid off in a couple of months, which I thought was really cool. The transaction took place in Oregon. I do plan on restoring this to keep. So it will live on the rest of its days in our living room. And I am just very excited to get to work on this piece. So I hope you guys enjoy something a little out of the ordinary and follow along on this journey with me. The first thing I needed to do was clean out the guts. Nothing was working. There were a lot of chewed wires. So initially I was being very ginger with it, thinking like, oh, okay, let me just not disturb anything. I mean, it was covered in dust and just all kinds of who knows what. So it took me a while to be like, you know what, okay, I'm just gonna go for it and get in there, unscrew any screw that I could find and see where it leads. Eventually I did get to the point where I could take the receiver out, move down into the antenna and the speaker. This whole process took me, admittedly, too long. I did not think it would take me quite as long as it did, but eventually I did overcome. I did get it cleaned out. The next step I took was to see about removing these slats. I knew I had to refinish them and it would be really difficult if I left them on. It would just make my life so much easier if I could figure out how to remove them. So again, I removed all the screws I could possibly find and noticed that they were still wedged in there fairly securely. I did go through and number these before I managed to take the whole thing apart. I turned it upside down and managed to use a rubber mallet to just knock all the slats loose. Okay, teachable moment. These were two of the different slats that I pulled out of the radio. This one looks like it's beautiful burl wood, but it's not. It is painted on design. So I took a little bit of my scraper to it because I had a feeling, and you can see there, it actually scrapes the design completely off. So this is not actual veneer. And you can actually tell if you look very, very closely at the seam if I could keep still, there's nothing there. These darker, smaller slats, there we are, they are veneer. So you can actually tell if you catch the light just right. You can see the wood grain, and do you see that thin film, that thin little layer right there? These are actual veneer. So I can go ahead and strip these, but if I attempt to strip the finish off of these, the three in the center, they're essentially gonna be blanks. So I need to figure out what to do. I would like to keep that design, but honestly, I have to strip them back so they'll match the rest of the radio. I'll sit on this for a little bit, but that's where we're at. The next step was to strip the finish off. So I used some lacquer thinner and steel wool to see how far I could get. The finish on this was very thick, so this took a lot longer than I anticipated, and quickly thought to pivot to stripping the piece with paint stripper. However, as I went along, I really noticed some of the wood grain start to pop, and I got really excited. The paint stripper I used was Smart Strip by Dumond, and I chose this because it is a thick, almost like lotion cream, and it sticks. So I used a chip brush to essentially just apply it, paint it on, if you will, and I did end up leaving this to work for several hours. This is a green stripper. It is not fumey. You don't need to wear a respirator to protect your lungs from. It just takes a little bit longer, as most green strippers do, but it did work. When it looked like the progress was done, I used my putty knife to peel back as much of the stripper as I could, and there was definitely finish coming off. The sides were a little bit thicker and more difficult to get clean. So after I removed all of the stripper, I went back in with my lacquer thinner and steel wool to get all of the residual paint stripper off and get the surface as clean and ready for sanding as possible. And here's what the radio looked like after the surface was as clean as I could get it before sanding. I thought it looked great, got all the finish off, but if you notice, there were some bands at the top two columns and right where they meet the trim, right where I'm showing. It looked like those were going to be veneer, but again, it was faux veneer painted on, so when I went to strip the surface, it peeled, obviously, the decorative paint off. But underneath it was still very beautiful veneer, so I decided to roll with it and not supplement by painting it or reapplying veneer. Next up is everybody's favorite step, sanding. I used a variety of sanding tools. I used my Surf Prep, I used hand sanding, I folded sandpaper to get into all of the little crevices for the trim. It took a lot of sanding. My next order of business was to figure out what I wanted to do with those larger slat pieces that had the painted on faux veneer. I wanted to do a gentle restoration on them, so not strip them back completely because I wouldn't be left with much and I'd have to paint, so I didn't want to do that. I decided to just gently sand them with a very high grit sandpaper just to knock some of the finish back and do a layer of gel stain. The gel stain I had on hand was General Finishes Nutmeg, General Finishes Antique Walnut, and I knew I had some old Varathane stain that I could try. So I started with the lighter tone first. This is Nutmeg, and it wasn't really changing the tone as much as I wanted. I knew I definitely wanted it darker, so I wiped it back and applied the Antique Walnut gel stain next. And still, even after applying it, it did not change the tone as much as I wanted. So I knew I had to go darker and finally decided to pull out the darkest stain I had, which was in the tone Kona by Varathane. As that stain went on, I knew we had a winner. It was definitely darker. It would conceal some of the scratches that I put there earlier just to see if it was an actual veneer or not. And I really liked the fact that it made the design, the underlying design, very rich and dramatic. When putting them side by side, you can definitely see that there's a tone difference. The top slat is darker than the one on the bottom. The case of the radio had a divot. I think it had been bumped at some point and it needed some repair. So I took this opportunity to fill in the divot with the wood filler from Famo Wood in the color Walnut, and just let that fully dry while I continue to work on other matters. Next step, I needed to gel stain the trim. It was a different species of wood, obviously, than the rest of the case, which was draped in veneer. I decided to go dark on the shoe. So here I am using Dark Walnut by Varathane. The great thing about gel stain is it's thicker, so it sticks better, especially if you're dealing with vertical surfaces. And it's very easy to apply. You either wipe it on, brush it on, roll it on, give it a few moments, and wipe it back. You don't want to let it dry because it can become tacky, but super easy to apply and really beautiful results. For the rest of the trim work, initially I thought to go lighter. So I am using Nutmeg on the vertical trim pieces here and also Nutmeg on the rest of the trim work. And I say initially because I do end up changing it later on. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. If you've made it this far, please hit the subscribe button. It means so much to a small growing channel like mine. We've made it to the fun part. So I will be applying Osmo's Poly X oil in the natural color. It is a hard wax oil, so it will give a really beautiful satin finish to the veneer work. Initially, I wanted to lacquer the radio, which is traditionally how it was done. But I live in Houston and our summers are just too humid to successfully apply lacquer. So I went with the hard wax oil. This stuff is very easy to apply. You wipe it on, let it soak in for a few minutes, and then wipe it off with a clean towel. Osmo specifically says to apply to bare wood. I had to allow a few days to go by for the gel stain trim pieces to fully dry before I hard wax those. I wanted to give some love to the inside of the case as well, so I sanded back the gray flaking paint that was initially there and applied a fresh coat of Sherwin-Williams Black Magic. Remember when I said I would be changing the stain on the trim pieces? Well, here we are. So I took one look at it, and after the hard wax oil had fully saturated and dried, I thought it looked too just even tone across the board. I wanted some more contrast. So the pieces that were stained nutmeg initially, I gave a light sand to just to give them a little texture and tooth, and went back over all of those trim pieces with the dark walnut by Varathane, which is the same stain I had used for the shoe. I needed to go back to my repair. So that divot that I used that wood filler on initially, now that I had hard waxed oil the rest of the case, I could color match and blend it into its surroundings. So I'm using a variety of just acrylic tube paints that I got for a wood repair kit on Amazon, some artist brushes. I really like this little fan brush. I also go in with some of my Blend All wax sticks, and finally some of my, a few of my Mohawk graining markers to really do my best to blend it in. And I think by the time that I'm done with it, you really can't even tell that it was initially there. After I'm happy with my repair, I do a light spray of Mohawk's vinyl sealer to seal all of the color correction in and make sure it doesn't smear off. We are in the final stretch. I wanted to give a little bit of love to this brass faceplate that was original to the radio. I didn't know if it was real brass. I didn't know if it was going to clean up as well as I had hoped. But I used a little bit of Brasso and some 2/0 steel wool, and it really polished it up nicely. I was very pleased and honestly quite surprised with the outcome. After I was done with the polish, I used the original screws that came with the radio to reattach it, and I think it's really starting to bring everything together. By this point, it had been another couple days since I restained the trim pieces. I needed to hard wax oil all of those to give them a really beautiful shine and luster and to protect them. Then it was time to attach the glass faceplate, which I had just cleaned up with some Windex. Even though I wasn't planning on doing any of the electrical repair myself, I still wanted to mock up the radio to stage it and take proper pictures of it. So I gave the receiver a quick clean with Windex. You can see some of the dials and buttons are directly attached. They were pretty dirty. I was getting a lot of tannins on my towel there, probably old nicotine residue. After the buttons were clean, I gave them a very light scuff sand before I sealed them with sanding sealer, let that dry, and then went in with some high gloss clear lacquer. Off camera, I had done the same with the 4 round buttons along the front, and then it was time for assembly. So let's take a look at the before. Lots of ambering through the years, solid bones, some scratches, thankful to have all of the buttons, and here is what it looks like after all of that work. I am absolutely in love with this piece. Like I had said initially, I do plan on keeping this in my own living room, and I couldn't ask for a better conversation piece. It is beautiful. I love the finish, and honestly, I feel like the pictures don't do it justice. So enjoy the rest of the video, and I thank you so much for watching.